The last transmission, the orbital defense platform Sentinel-9, died without ceremony. One moment it blazed with cannon fire. The next it was simply gone, consumed by the writhing mass of organic ships that blotted out the stars. From her command center deep beneath the surface of Thalos Prime, Council Leader Zephyra watched the tactical display with 4 of her 6 eyes while the other 2 scanned casualty reports. The numbers climbed so fast they blurred into meaninglessness. "Evacuate the civilian sectors," she ordered, her voice steady despite the tremor in her primary manipulator appendages. Around her, the command staff worked with desperate efficiency, their scales shifting through colors that betrayed their terror. Outside, the sky burned. The consuming swarm had arrived in Confederation space 8 months ago. No one knew where they came from, only that they consumed everything organic and left behind dead worlds stripped to bedrock. They were not machines, not quite. Each ship was a living thing, armor-plated and ravenous, capable of splitting into smaller vessels or merging into nightmarish juggernauts that shrugged off antimatter warheads like summer rain. The Confederation had fought. Every species, every fleet, every weapon in their considerable arsenal had been deployed. It made no difference. The swarm learned, adapted, evolved. Weapons that worked once failed the second time. Strategies that showed promise were countered within hours. It was as if they were fighting an opponent that could read minds and rewrite reality. "Council Leader, the northern continent has gone dark." The tactical officer's voice cracked. 40 billion souls just gone. Zephyra closed all 6 eyes. 40 billion, added to the trillions already lost across 37 worlds. The Confederation, a union of 200 species that had maintained peace and prosperity for 10,000 years, was dying, not slowly, not with dignity, but screaming into the void while something ancient and hungry devoured it piece by piece. "Activate Protocol Omega," Zephyra said quietly. The command center fell silent. Every being turned to stare at her. "Council Leader, Protocol Omega is forbidden." Her second-in-command, Vrathos, stepped forward. His 6 legs trembled. "The sanctions, the quarantine laws, they exist for a reason. We swore oaths. We swore to protect the Confederation." Zephyra's voice cut like a blade. "What Confederation will remain if we die here? What oaths matter to corpses?" She moved to the central console and placed her manipulator on the biometric scanner. "I take full responsibility. If we survive this, they can execute me for breaking the quarantine, but we will survive." Deep in the archive vaults, ancient locks disengaged. Zephyra descended alone, her footsteps echoing in chambers that had not been opened in millennia. The walls were carved with warnings in 100 dead languages, all saying the same thing: never open, never contact, never release. At the chamber's heart sat a crystalline data core wrapped in enough warning symbols to make a scholar's career. Beside it, sealed in a container that hummed with active containment fields, lay a single set of spatial coordinates. The label was simple, written in the first script: Sol 3, Earth, the Death World, the Forbidden Planet. Zephyra had studied the histories. Every council leader did, sworn to secrecy, burdened with knowledge that must never be shared. Earth had been discovered 12,000 years ago, by an exploration vessel that had stumbled into an unremarkable yellow star system. They found a world teeming with life, and on it, a species that called themselves humans. The explorers made the mistake of landing. What followed was classified at the highest levels, but the records were clear. Humanity, barely past their atomic age, had somehow captured the exploration team, not through superior technology, but through cunning, trap setting, and a willingness to sacrifice their own people to achieve victory. When a rescue fleet arrived, they found the explorers alive but traumatized, and the humans studying every piece of technology they could dismantle. The Confederation Council of that era made a decision: quarantine Earth. Not to protect the galaxy from human technology, but to protect it from human nature. The psychological profiles were terrifying. Humans were persistence predators who had hunted their prey to exhaustion across their world. They were tribal, aggressive, creative, and worst of all, they seemed to enjoy conflict. Their entire history was an unbroken chain of warfare, each generation developing new and more efficient ways to kill. But there was something else in those classified files. Something that made the ancient council seal Earth away rather than destroy it. Humans were also fiercely protective, capable of breathtaking compassion, and when properly motivated, They could accomplish the impossible. They were a species of contradictions, and that made them more dangerous than any weapon. The quarantine had held for 12,000 years. In that time, the Confederation had watched from a distance as humanity developed faster than light travel, established colonies throughout their system, and then, mysteriously, stopped expanding. They had respected the quarantine borders, sending occasional messages that went unanswered, growing their population and technology in isolation. No one knew what Earth had become. And until today, no one had dared to find out. Zephyra extracted the coordinates and returned to the command center. The swarm was in the atmosphere now. She could hear the screaming through the ventilation systems. "Open a channel on the ancient frequency," she ordered. "Direct it to Sol 3. The communications officer's tentacles moved with practiced precision. "Channel open, Council Leader, but with the damage to our relay network, I cannot guarantee." Static filled the speakers, then impossibly a voice, clear, strong, speaking in perfect Confederation standard. "This is Captain Rebecca Chen of the Earth Defense Coordination. We've been monitoring this frequency for quite some time." A pause. "You're the Confederation, aren't you? The ones who've been ignoring our calls for 12,000 years." Zephyra's scales rippled with shock. You speak our language?" "We speak all 643 languages in the Confederation database." The human's voice carried what might have been amusement. "We've had a lot of time to study. Your quarantine beacons are quite chatty once you crack the encryption, which took us about 3,000 years, but who's counting?" "We are dying," Zephyra said bluntly. There was no time for diplomacy. "An enemy we cannot defeat is consuming our worlds. I am breaking 12,000 years of quarantine law to ask for your help. I do not know what you have become, but the ancient records suggest you are effective at warfare." Silence. Then laughter. Not cruel laughter, but the sound of someone hearing a punchline they'd been waiting for. "Captain?" Zephyra felt her secondary heart skip a beat. "I'm sorry, Council Leader. It's just, we've been preparing for this call for so long. Do you know what it's like to be caged for 12 millennia? Told you're too dangerous to play with the other children. Humanity has been collectively losing our minds with boredom." The humor drained from Chen's voice, replaced with something that made Zephyra's blood run cold. "You want effective? Tell me about this enemy." Zephyra transmitted everything. The tactical data, the biological scans, the recordings of battles lost. As the data flowed, she heard typing in the background, voices conferring in rapid English that the translator struggled to follow. "Fascinating," Chen said finally. "A hive-mind biological swarm that adapts to threats and consumes organic matter for reproduction. Self-replicating, learning, persistent. Council Leader, you've been fighting them wrong. We have thrown everything we have at them." "Yes, but you've been fighting to win. To minimize casualties. To preserve your ethics and honor." Chen's next words were deliberate. "You need someone who knows how to fight to exterminate." And Council Leader, humanity wrote the manual on extinction events. We've caused 6 on our own planet. We know what we're doing. How soon can you reach us? We've had ships ready for 8,000 years. Ready and waiting, hoping, praying even. Fleet Command has been running simulations against every possible threat profile we could imagine. Your swarm matches threat category Omega-7. We have 17 response protocols for that. Something beeped in the background. Task Force Reckoning is launching now. ETA to your position. 4 hours. That's impossible. The journey from Sol to Thalos takes weeks even with military-grade drives. Council Leader, we've had 12,000 years in timeout. Did you think we spent it all learning languages? Chen's voice carried a predatory satisfaction. We'll see you soon. And Council Leader? Tell your people to get to deep shelters. Our doctrine is aggressive. You're about to learn why Earth was quarantined. The channel closed. Zephyra stood in the silent command center, suddenly uncertain if she had just saved the Confederation or doomed it. 4 hours later, space above Thalos Prime tore open. The swarm had orbital supremacy. Their bioships crowded the sky in a roiling mass of chitin and fused metal. Harvest beams systematically reducing the surface to component molecules. They had detected the FTL signature and turned thousands of sensor clusters toward the rift. What emerged made no sense. The ships were wrong. Not built with the elegant efficiency of Confederation design, but cobbled together like weapons forged in desperation and rage. One vessel looked like someone had strapped engines to an asteroid and covered it in gun batteries. Another was sleek and black, covered in angular plates that seemed to drink light. A third defied description entirely, its geometry shifting as if it existed in more dimensions than 3. There were hundreds of them, maybe thousands. The tactical display couldn't get an accurate count because they kept moving in patterns that shouldn't work, executing maneuvers that violated basic physics. The largest ship, a dreadnought that bristled with weapon systems, broadcast on all frequencies. Captain Chen's face appeared on every screen. She was younger than Zephyra expected, with dark hair pulled back and eyes that had seen too much. Behind her, the bridge crew moved with frightening efficiency. "Attention-consuming swarm," Chen said pleasantly. "I'm Captain Rebecca Chen, representing the Human Defense Fleet. You've been eating our neighbors, and we're here to discuss your poor life choices." The swarm responded the only way it knew how. 10,000 bioships turned their weapons on the human fleet and fired. The humans fired back. What Zephyra witnessed in the next 20 minutes redefined her understanding of warfare. The humans didn't just fight. They destroyed with surgical precision and overwhelming violence. Weapons she didn't recognize tore through swarm vessels, missiles that curved around defensive fire, beam weapons that seemed to ignore armor entirely, and something that made entire sections of swarm ships simply cease to exist, erased from reality with mathematical precision. But it wasn't the weapons that terrified her. It was the tactics. The swarm adapted just as it always did. Bioships evolved thicker armor, altered their hull composition, merged into larger forms. It didn't matter. The humans anticipated every adaptation and had a counter ready. They fought like they could read the future. But Zephyra realized the truth was worse. They understood violence so completely that they could predict exactly how an enemy would respond. "All ships, execute Protocol Hunter-Killer," Chen ordered. "Remember your training. They're big, they're scary, but they're still just meat. And humans have been apex predators for 2 million years." The human fleet scattered into smaller groups, each hunting swarm vessels with coordinated brutality. They didn't just destroy ships, they studied them mid-battle, learning, adapting faster than the swarm could evolve. Within an hour, the orbital battle was over. The swarm was retreating, broadcasting distress signals that spoke of confusion and, impossibly, fear. Chen's face reappeared on Zephyra's screen. "Council Leader, your planet is secure. We're deploying ground forces to handle the remaining swarm elements on the surface. Medical teams are standing by." "And Council Leader?" Chen's expression was grim. "We need to talk. Because if your swarm is as widespread as your data suggests, we're going to need to do things your people won't like. War isn't pretty, and we're very, very good at the ugly parts." Zephyra looked at the orbital display, at the debris field that had been an unstoppable armada, at the human ships moving with predatory grace through the wreckage. She thought of the ancient warnings, the quarantine, the reasons Earth had been sealed away. They had called for help. They had summoned humanity. And now, watching human drop pods rain onto her world's surface, she understood with perfect clarity why the ancients had been so afraid, not of what humanity would do to enemies, but what they might become if they ever stopped seeing a difference. The war for the Confederation's survival had begun, and humanity, caged for 12,000 years, was finally free to do what they did best. Evolution of War the Swarm had never retreated before. In 8 months of systematic consumption across Confederation space, it had pushed forward with mechanical inevitability, adapting to every defense, overwhelming every position. But now, for the first time, it fled, not in disorder, but with the calculated withdrawal of something that had encountered a threat it didn't understand. Zephyra watched from her rebuilt command center as human vessels pursued the retreating bioships. The engagement was 3 days old, and in that time she had witnessed humanity wage war across 7 star systems simultaneously. The efficiency was breathtaking and deeply unsettling. "Council Leader, the human commander is requesting a strategic conference," Vrathos announced, his scales still pale from stress. "She wants to meet in person." 30 minutes later, Captain Rebecca Chen stood in Zephyra's office, still wearing her combat void suit with the helmet mag locked to her hip. She was small by Confederation standards, barely reaching Zephyra's thorax, but she carried herself with the coiled readiness of a predator. 2 other humans accompanied her. A massive male with scarred hands introduced as Sergeant Marcus Webb, and a slight woman with calculating eyes named Dr. Sarah Kimura. "Thank you for seeing us." "Council Leader." Chen sat without invitation. and Zephyra noticed how the human's eyes constantly scanned the room, cataloging exits and threats. We need to discuss the strategic situation. Your fleet has accomplished in 3 days what we failed to achieve in 8 months, Zephyra said carefully. The Confederation owes humanity a debt beyond calculation. You don't owe us anything yet, Chen replied. We've won some battles. The war is far from over. She gestured and Dr. Kimura activated a holographic display. The Confederation's core territory appeared, marked with red zones showing swarm infestation. There were too many red zones. We've been analyzing the swarm's biological structure and tactical behavior. I need to tell you some things you won't want to hear. Zephyra felt her secondary stomachs clench. Speak plainly. The swarm isn't just an invading force. It's a terraforming mechanism. Dr. Kimura stepped forward, expanding the display to show cellular structures. Every world it consumes is being converted into a breeding ground. The organic matter isn't just food, it's raw material. Each consumed planet will eventually birth a new swarm fleet. Based on our projections, you have approximately 6 months before the consumed worlds begin producing second-generation swarms. At that point, the infestation becomes mathematically unstoppable. The room spun. 6 months? Then we've already lost. Not necessarily. Chen leaned forward. But winning requires actions that violate every treaty and ethical guideline in your Confederation charter. We've reviewed your laws. They're designed for a civilized galaxy. The swarm isn't civilized. What are you suggesting? Chen's expression hardened. Scorched earth. Every infested world that can't be saved needs to be sterilized completely. Biosphere eradication. We're not talking about surgical strikes or targeted bombardments. We're talking about making planets uninhabitable for 10,000 years. That's genocide, Vrathos gasped. Mass murder on an unimaginable scale. It's triage. Sergeant Webb spoke for the first time, his voice like grinding stone. You lose the limb or you lose the patient. We've done this calculation before, Council Leader. On Earth. Multiple times throughout our history. Zephyra thought of the ancient files, the warnings. You've committed genocide before? We've committed every sin imaginable, Chen said quietly. We nearly destroyed ourselves 17 times. Nuclear war, biological plagues, artificial intelligence uprisings, ecological collapse. Earth should be a dead world. It isn't, because every time we stood on the brink, enough of us chose to do whatever was necessary to survive. Not the right thing. Not the moral thing. The necessary thing. I cannot authorize the destruction of inhabited worlds. Then you'll watch your entire civilization die. Chen stood, her voice sharp. Council Leader, I understand. Your people have lived in peace for 10,000 years. You've built something beautiful. But beautiful things are fragile, and the universe doesn't care about your ethics. The swarm certainly doesn't. Zephyra closed all 6 eyes. When she opened them, she saw Chen watching her with something that might have been sympathy. How did Earth survive its darkest moments? Zephyra asked. Chen was silent for a moment. We accepted what we are. Humanity isn't inherently good or evil, Council Leader. We're survivors. We have the capacity for incredible compassion and unspeakable cruelty, often from the same individual. We learned to weaponize both. She gestured to the holographic display. Your Confederation tried to breed the violence out of yourselves. You created a society built on reason and cooperation. It's admirable, but you lost something essential in the process. What? The ability to be monsters when monsters are needed. The words hung in the air like a curse. Zephyra thought of her children, safe in deep bunkers. She thought of the billions already consumed, the trillions more in the swarm's path. She thought of the warnings about Earth, about why humanity had been caged. Tell me your plan, she said finally. All of it. Chen's briefing lasted 4 hours. The strategy was comprehensive, brutal, and had a 73% probability of success. It required the sacrifice of 42 worlds already partially infested, the complete militarization of every remaining Confederation species, and the deployment of weapons humanity had developed but never used, weapons they had built in quarantine, hoping they'd never be necessary. We call it the Extinction Protocol, Chen explained. It's designed to eliminate a threat so completely that it can never return. We've had to use it twice on Earth. Once against an artificial intelligence that tried to convert all organic matter into processing substrate. Once against a biological weapon that escaped containment and began evolving out of control. You succeeded both times, obviously. We're still here. Chen's smile was cold. But both times cost us billions of lives and centuries of recovery. We learned from those experiences. The key to fighting an adaptive threat isn't superior firepower. It's superior adaptation. Over the following weeks, Zephyra watched humanity teach the Confederation how to wage total war. Human military advisors were embedded with every fleet. They trained Confederation soldiers in tactics that had been considered barbaric: ambush warfare, psychological operations, targeting civilian infrastructure to deny resources to the enemy. The humans explained each lesson with clinical detachment, treating atrocity like mathematics, but they also taught hope. Sergeant Webb worked with Confederation ground forces, showing them how to fight when outnumbered and outgunned. The swarm thinks it's the apex predator, he told a group of traumatized soldiers who had survived the fall of their homeworld. It's wrong. Every species in this confederation evolved past the need for violence. Humanity didn't. We just learned to control it. And now we're going to teach you how to find the predator that's still buried in your genes. Dr. Kimura worked with Confederation scientists, developing bioweapons specifically tailored to swarm physiology. They adapt to direct threats, she explained during one late-night session. So we don't threaten them directly. We introduce genetic corruption that doesn't activate for several reproduction cycles. By the time they realize they're infected, half their fleet carries the modification. The turning point came at the Battle of Nexus Station, the Confederation's primary military shipyard. The swarm arrived with 3 times the force that had conquered Thalos Prime, determined to deny the Confederation its production capacity. The human fleet was outnumbered 5-1. Chen stood on her bridge watching the tactical display with eyes that never blinked. All ships execute Protocol Chimera. Show them what humanity learned from studying them. The human fleet split apart, each vessel transforming mid-battle, their hulls reconfigured, adapting to swarm weapons just as the swarm adapted to theirs. But the humans were faster. Each adaptation was calculated, tested in simulation, optimized before deployment. The swarm learned through trial and error. Humanity learned through directed evolution, and then the humans revealed their masterpiece. From the largest human vessels emerged something that made the swarm hesitate. Biomechanical constructs that looked like swarm ships but moved with human precision. Trojan horses, Chen called them. Swarm vessels that had been captured, dissected, and rebuilt with human technology inside swarm biology. The swarm couldn't distinguish friend from foe. The false vessels moved among them, broadcasting swarm identification signals accepted as kin. When they detonated, each explosion triggered a cascade reaction that spread through the hive mind link, corrupting navigation and communication. The swarm fleet disintegrated into chaos. Human ships swept through the confusion like reapers through wheat. Within 6 hours, the battle was over. The swarm presence at Nexus Station was completely eradicated. Zephyra reviewed the battle records in stunned silence. You thought like them. Became like them. We became better than them, Chen corrected. That's the human advantage, Council Leader. We're not the strongest or the fastest or the most advanced, but we're the best at learning from our enemies. At becoming them, understanding them, and then surpassing them. She paused. Your Confederation quarantined Earth because you were afraid we'd destroy the galaxy. You were half right. We will destroy anything that threatens survival. The trick is making sure we're pointed in the right direction. The war continued for another 4 months. Humanity pushed the swarm back system by system, world by world. The extinction protocol was deployed on 37 infested planets, rendering them lifeless but preventing the birth of new swarm fleets. Each authorization made Zephyra feel like she was losing pieces of her soul. But it was working. The Confederation forces, trained by human advisors, began winning their own battles. They learned to think like predators, to embrace the violence their ancestors had bred away. It was ugly, brutal, and effective. The final battle took place at the swarm's origin point, a dead system on the galaxy's edge where the first bioships had emerged. Chen's fleet arrived to find the system converted into a massive hatchery. Billions of swarm vessels in various stages of gestation. Fleet Admiral Morrison wants to use the Nova device. Chen reported to Zephyra via quantum link. Morrison was the overall human commander, a grizzled veteran who had waited 12,000 years for this moment. 1 device, 1 star. We can trigger a supernova that will sterilize the entire system. How many swarm vessels will die? All of them, along with any possibility of the swarm ever returning. Chen's expression was grave. Council leader, this is the decision that defines species. Do we commit calculated extinction? Or do we risk the swarm recovering and returning stronger? Zafira thought of everything she had learned, of the humans who had lived in isolation, preparing for a war they hoped would never come, of the prices paid and the lines crossed, of the fact that her children were alive because humanity had been willing to do what the Confederation could not. Activate the device, she said. End this. The star-designated Swarm Prime detonated with the force of 10 billion fusion bombs. The shockwave consumed the system, vaporizing every swarm vessel, every biostructure, every trace of the invasion. In one terrible moment, humanity demonstrated why Earth had been quarantined. They possessed the will to destroy an entire solar system without hesitation. When the war ended, the Confederation had survived. Barely. 73 worlds lost, 2 trillion beings dead, and a civilization forever changed. Humanity offered to help rebuild, to share technology, to finally join the galactic community they had been excluded from. Zafira met with Chen one final time before the human fleet departed. They stood in observation lounge overlooking Thalos Prime, watching reconstruction drones work to heal the scars. Thank you, Zafira said quietly, for saving us, for teaching us, for doing what we couldn't. Chen nodded but didn't smile. Council leader, I need you to understand something. Humanity didn't save you out of kindness or nobility. We saved you because you gave us what we'd been denied for 12,000 years, a purpose, a war to fight, an enemy to destroy. She turned to face Zafira directly. We're going home now, back to our quarantine. But we both know the truth. The galaxy has seen what we can do. You've all learned that when civilized solutions fail, there's a species willing to do the uncivilized things. That knowledge changes everything. Are you saying we should reinstate the quarantine? I'm saying you should decide what kind of galaxy you want. One where humanity is your weapon of last resort, forever caged and waiting? Or one where we're integrated, part of your civilization, our violence controlled but available? Chen's eyes were hard. Either way, you can never unsee what we are. And Council Leader, neither can we. You didn't just call for help. You reminded us what we're capable of, what we've always been. The human fleet departed 3 days later, returning to Sol system with military precision. The Confederation Council debated for months about Earth's status. The arguments were passionate, the fears legitimate. Humanity had saved them, yes, but at a cost that went beyond casualty numbers. They had shown the Confederation its shadow self, the capacity for violence that every species carried in its genetic memory. More than that, they had demonstrated that sometimes survival required embracing that darkness. In the end, the vote was close. Earth would remain quarantined, but the terms were changed. Humanity would be monitored, yes, but also consulted. A hotline was established. Military exchanges were authorized. The cage was still there, but the door was cracked open. Zafira reviewed the decision alone in her office, watching the vote count flash across her screen. She thought about Chen's final words about purpose and violence and the price of survival. Her terminal chimed. A message from Earth, from Captain Chen. Council Leader, we understand the decision. We'll respect the modified quarantine. But I want you to know something. Humanity doesn't regret helping you. We don't regret the violence or the sacrifices, because for 12,000 years we've asked ourselves the same question. What are we for? What purpose does all this controlled aggression serve? You gave us the answer. We're the monsters that fight monsters, the predators that hunt predators, the species that does what others can't, so that civilizations like yours can continue to exist. You were right to fear us. You were right to cage us. But you were also right to call us when you had no other choice. Sleep well, Council Leader. We'll be here if you need us again, and we both know you will. Zafira closed the message and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, humanity waited in isolation, maintaining their weapons, training their soldiers, preparing for the next call, not hoping for war, but not fearing it either. The Confederation had survived, but it had paid a price beyond worlds and lives. It had learned that in the dark spaces between stars, sometimes the only thing standing between civilization and extinction was the willingness to become the very thing you feared, and now they knew exactly where to find it. The quarantine held. Earth remained isolated, a weapon locked away until needed. But the galaxy had changed. In quiet moments, in classified briefings, in conversations whispered behind closed doors. Species across the Confederation asked themselves the same question. If they faced extinction again, would they make the same call? Would they summon humanity and accept the consequences? Most concluded they would, because survival, they had learned from Earth's example, always demanded a price, and some prices could only be paid in violence. 12,000 years of quarantine had been meant to protect the galaxy from humanity's nature. But the Swarm War had revealed a darker truth. The galaxy needed that nature. It needed the species that never forgot how to be monsters. Because civilizations built on peace and reason had forgotten how to face the monsters that lived in the dark. Earth remained quarantined. Humanity remained isolated. But everyone knew the truth now. The cage was never to keep humanity in. It was to make sure that when they came out aimed at the right target. And in the end, that was the most terrifying realization of all. Not that humanity was dangerous, but that they were necessary. That somewhere in the vast complexity of galactic civilization, there needed to be a species that understood violence so completely that they could wield it with surgical precision when all other options failed. The Confederation had called for help in desperation. Humanity had answered with terrifying efficiency. And now, both sides understood their relationship with perfect clarity. Humanity would remain the weapon of last resort, caged, controlled, but forever waiting. Because in a universe filled with wonders and horrors, sometimes the greatest comfort came from knowing that when darkness rose, there was something darker ready to fight it. The quarantine held. The peace continued. And humanity, patient as always, returned to their isolation and waited. They had time. They had always had time. And if history taught anything, it was that sooner or later the call would come again. When it did, they would be ready. They were always ready.